Cool. Hey, and welcome to Circadian Rhythm Secrets. I'm super excited about this bonus module. I'm here with my stealth health mentor, Mr. Cliff Wilde, who is basically the guy who taught me about circadian rhythm. He's the one who got me to start really focusing on this part of the sleeping process. And when I talk about how there's a difference between getting a solid 8 hours and applying these certain strategies to our way of sleeping, this is what I'm talking about. It's like really optimizing your circadian rhythm. It's completely transformed my health. And it's not just about the sleep. It's about all these other things that we do throughout the day. So without any further ado, let's just get into it. Cliff, for the people watching, can you just give them a quick little background on who you are, where you've come from, how you ended up doing what you do, and give me the Reader's Digest version of your story.
Right. So limited words. So I was born, which is no miracle in itself, I suppose. But I was born with a 64 degrees scoliosis and kyphosis in my spine. So bend to the left, bend to the back. And I had a double fusion when I was just under 3 years of age. It was one of the first double fusions, like 30 odd years ago now. And so I lost 6 inches of height, which obviously your guys might not know. A lot of your nervous system, your main nervous system, runs through your spinal column, right? So if you have a 64 degrees curve of your spine going left and backwards, it's going to have impacts on how your nervous system works. So I was set up pretty amazingly from birth. And then when I was 15, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called ulcerative colitis, which is a gut disease. And then when I was 17, a brain tumor, which was very rare. They'd only ever seen once before in the UK. And then 18, I had meningitis of the brain, and some other things afterwards that were not as severe. But long story short, I've been 11 years symptom med-free, everything. Which, for an autoimmune issue shouldn't be possible. Every doctor under the sun that I saw told me that, you might be in remission, but you'll always flare up. You'll always need meds or surgery or whatever it might be. And over the last 11 years, me and my wife, Marta, have spent upwards of £250,000 hiring people, doing courses, qualifications, mentors, applying. And to this date, we've now helped hundreds of people in 25 different countries solve pretty complex health issues.
Yeah, and that's actually why I hired Cliff in the first place. Cliff is my coach, and Marta is my coach, and they have helped me overcome my mold infection and help me get my life back and help restore my energy and my gut, all these crazy things that I had so many problems with. I'm still on the journey, but I mean, Cliff would tell you that night and day in terms of how I feel,
yeah.
how I was feeling to how I'm feeling now. And I owe a lot of that to him. I did put in the work, and I was pretty disciplined, and I'm pretty religious with the sleep stuff and what we're going to get into here today. But I owe a lot of my success to him when it comes to my health. And so what I want to share with you and talk about today is the circadian rhythm. Can you explain to us, Cliff, why the circadian rhythm? First of all, what is it? Let's define what the circadian rhythm is and explain to people what role it plays.
So circadian rhythm is, the easiest way to think about it is we have what we call our autonomic nervous systems. So on our autonomic nervous systems, you have things that you don't need to think about. Think like breathing and other things like this, they happen, right? And so circadian rhythm at a biological level, or a cell level, is signaling those processes. So, they signal hormonal processes, they signal processes to innate sleep, they signal hunger and all this different kind of stuff, right? So what we have to really understand about signaling is the circadian rhythm really deals well when we're in a rhythm, okay? And that rhythm is very much tracked and regulated by 3 different things. So for instance, light being one, so light and dark, or physical activity or exercise is another one, and then what we call the feed and fast cycle. So we can manipulate the circadian rhythm, change signaling at a very deep biological level by manipulating those 3 things. And the people that have, you know, erratic meal times, people that have, meals late towards bed, people that, for instance, are very sedentary. All of these people in all of the literature have worse health. So one of the reasons we deal with circadian rhythm is because, one, it's not that sexy, but the outcome from doing something that's pretty simple on the outside of it has just such a massive, profound long-term effect on someone's health positively, rather than just saying, hey, just take a supplement. Do you see what I mean? Like, that's what people jump to first. So circadian rhythm is really about giving yourself an ability to regulate processes, whether it's sleep or regulate inflammation, or just in generally build resilience of the body, because that's what comes as a side effect of good circadian rhythm.
So just to recap what Cliff said, you said that main contributors to circadian rhythm are light, there are movement, and there's meal timing.
Yeah, feed and fast cycle. Yeah, exactly.
Feed and fast cycle. Cool. So, how do we go about setting the circadian rhythm? Like why, like we know why the circadian rhythm is important, right? It's influencing all these factors. And how do we set it?
Yeah, sure. So you can set it in many different ways, like out of those three things. And so the reality is that the science is super clear. Like, if you don't have consistency in your circadian rhythm, you're going to have more symptoms as a person, more issues, poorer sleep, more gut issues, more, like, it's linked even to depression, anxiety, all of these kind of things. So when we're looking at setting it, we want to make sure that we're in a position where when we wake up, we ideally want to keep at least the first hour, 1 to 3 hours, free of any food. And the reason we say that, and it obviously this is caveated massively depending on your blood glucose management, inflammation, all of these kind of things. So don't just take this as gospel. Like, it's, what I would say for people is try and keep your first hour free of food if possible, because we have something what we call late stage sleep. So when we come awake, our body's still coming around. So what's best done is we're still in that fasting state. We're more insulin sensitive at that time. And what we can do is upregulate our digestion. So what we can do, if someone gets up and they do some sort of physical activity, even if it's just walking for 20 minutes, the win is just huge with regards to setting circadian rhythm. Because what you do when you go for that walk, they had a study that came out not so long ago where if you walk for 20 minutes at around 3.5 miles an hour, then you release 20 times the amount of bile than if you didn't. And people will be like, yeah, why do I care? Well, bile is massively important for sterilizing the upper part of your small intestine. So all these people who get like repeat SIBO issues and try and keep annihilating it with antimicrobials, they don't have good bile flow. So for instance, if you can get someone up and moving, you can get good bile flow, you can sterilize a small intestine, you can keep the microbiome happy in the large intestine, and you then trigger enzyme activity. So then when you eat your first meal, you break the fast, your body is ready for it.
So a lot of people who buy the course, they got two things going on. Number one, they want to lower their stress. And number two, they want to increase their energy. So why is this important for those two things?
Yeah, sure. So the reality is, when people want to lower their stress, we should feel the most alert when we first wake up, right? And most people don't. And that's the first thing that tells you that their circadian rhythm's out, right? Because when you first wake up, your cortisol should be at its highest. Cortisol is a stress hormone, right? So people think that's negative, but it's not. It's the thing that triggers alertness. So if you can feel very alert, then generally your stress throughout the day is going to feel different to you. Because what happens when you wake up and you feel tired, you do things to lift your energy, right? So you pick caffeine or sugary drinks or foods or whatever it might be, or you go and exercise really, really hard, even though your body doesn't have capacity. And all of those things create stress. So it's counterproductive, right? So if you want better energy and to reduce your stress, like, that's the argument of doing things with circadian rhythm, because you might not see the difference in day one, but give it like 14 days of doing this stuff, you'll definitely notice the difference, especially with stress and energy.
Because the resilience factor too, right? Like, could we expand on that? Like, why does it make you more resilient, and like why, like,
Yeah.
what's the impact of that further down the chain?
Yeah. So the biggest thing with the body is it loves consistency. So like, for instance, if you wake up every day at, let's say, 6 a.m. and you eat your breakfast at 8 a.m., your body before 8 a.m. is already producing enzymes. It's already producing stomach acid. It's already upregulating processes before you put any food near your mouth. And so then when you put food in, it's not a stress on the body, right? So then if let's say someone is traveling, if anyone remembers what that is, but if someone is traveling and they get up 2 hours earlier and they eat immediately because they need to get to the airport, that food is then a stress on their body, right? Because it messes up signaling. And so that's why, you know, some of the people that we see some of the worst disease states in are things like air hostesses, right? Because of all the messed up circadian rhythms. There's loads of literature on it. So, you know, that's one of my arguments, is that the body loves consistency. When you give the body consistency, and when I say consistency, I mean that you move regularly, your light exposure is good in the morning, and, you know, it's changed in the evening for, you know, blue blockers or whatever it might be, whatever you choose in the evenings. And then you obviously get your right exercise and your meal timings are set throughout the day. When you do that, your body knows what to expect. So then in between meals, for instance, it can work on other things. But for instance, if it has no idea when it's going to get the next meal, or when you're going to move, or when you're going to go to sleep, then what happens, you're in a position where essentially these things become extra stressors on the body. And that's what breaks down resilience. It stops you building resilience.
So we can set our circadian rhythm by controlling our light, by controlling our eating and fasting window, right? And then we can control it by movement. You know, what else do we need to know about circadian rhythm that maybe is overlooked or is not talked about enough?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest things with circadian rhythm is inflammation. Like there's lots of studies with regards to the effects of circadian rhythm and it being out of alignment. So if people are going to bed really late, for instance, getting up early, if people have erratic meal timings, if people are not getting enough light first thing. So to trigger the wakefulness in us, we need 1000 lux, right? So lux is like a measurement of light. And so, for instance, if you think of like a standard indoor lighting that I'm under, that might be somewhere like 150 to 200 lux. So, you know, most people, especially in the corporate world, you know, they live in inside lighting for 10 hours of their day. You know, they wake up, they're inside, they go to the car, they then drive to work, they sit in a cubicle, and they wear sunglasses on their way to work, for instance. So it blocks all this light. So you're stopping them triggering their activation in their body. And these things all don't sound like big things, but over time, they break down your barriers for how your body's meant to function. And so that's why it's such an important thing. Inflammation is one of the biggest side effects. When you can get someone's body into a good pattern, you'll calm their immune system. You will find that they're less reactive to foods. You will find that their energy goes up. Like, these are just some of the easy things to deal with.
And let's talk about inflammation, because like, when is there a connection between inflammation and like brain fog and like lethargy and like sluggishness?
Yeah. So it depends on people, obviously. Like when we get into things like brain fog and all of those things, we kind of get into talking a little bit about the blood-brain barrier and understanding. So we have different barriers in the body. So we have obviously the gut barrier, which is one where people have probably heard of leaky gut before. Most people don't realize there's two types of leaky gut. It's a different conversation. But so you have the gut barrier, you have the blood-brain barrier, you also have a barrier for your lungs, you also have a barrier for your bladder, for instance. And all of these are made up of very specific cells. When them cells become compromised, then, for instance, we can start ending up with things like brain fog, because certain things cross these barriers that shouldn't. And so that's where that kind of plays a part. And if people have, poor meal frequency, the likelihood is they're also going to have poor management of their blood glucose levels. When they have poor management of blood glucose levels, they're going to have, cravings, they're going to have poor habits, they're going to end up in, dysbiosis of their gut because they're feeding all the wrong things in the microbiome, for instance. The microbiome is a big regulator of circadian rhythms because it regulates things like inflammation signaling, hormonal signaling as well.
So how does blood glucose or your blood sugar levels, how does that impact your sleep? Because obviously the having your circadian rhythm is going to influence your blood sugar and your regulation of that blood sugar. But then how does that impact your sleep? Right? So, because it's like two ends, right? Like you have the circadian rhythm here, which impacts the blood sugar, but then the blood sugar impacts the sleep, which impacts the circadian rhythm.
Absolutely. So blood sugar is an interesting one. So one thing that everyone here can do is a really simple test is get like a blood glucose monitor. You don't need to spend any more than like $30, $40 on it, and do a blood glucose tolerance test or glucose tolerance test. So you drink 70 grams of pure glucose on an empty stomach first time that you wake up. So you wake up, do your fasted blood glucose reading, and then you drink 70 grams of glucose in water. Then 20 minutes later, you take blood glucose reading, 20 minutes later again, blood glucose reading, then 20 minutes later again, and then 30 minutes and 30 minutes. So what I can, send you a video of that for a bonus for these guys if they want it. But the point is we're looking for a pattern in how people manage their blood glucose. So one of the biggest things in America at the moment is metabolic syndrome. And that's one of the reasons they think they're struggling with viruses that are prevalent. So what's happening is blood glucose is going up and it continues and continues to go up. And then after a 2-hour period, it should have sunk in a nice little curve in an arc back to its starting figure, your fasted blood glucose. But
so
what
just in case someone doesn't know what blood glucose is, could you just explain blood sugar?
Yeah. So basically the easiest way to think about it is, let's use carbohydrates, because carbohydrates break down into glucose, right? There are different types of sugars. We won't get into it. We'll keep it simple. So basically, if you have pasta, a bowl of pasta, like a majority of that pasta, 70% of it's going to break down into glucose very quickly, which hits your bloodstream. So when it hits your bloodstream, glucose in too higher amounts is toxic. That's why, for instance, people that are type 2 diabetic, if it's uncontrolled, could go blind because of calcifying of proteins, or they could lose limbs, whatever it might be. So the body regulates blood glucose very, very, very tightly by insulin and another hormone called glucagon. The problem is, before someone gets to diabetes, they can get to something called insulin resistance or pre-diabetes. So blood glucose can be high and your body isn't as good as clearing it out as possible. It doesn't get it to the cells to use it or store it. So what happens is we want to see a nice pattern of, okay, I ingest glucose, my blood glucose goes up, obviously, because I've ingested it. Insulin grabs hold of that glucose, which is essentially a hormone, to pull it to the cell. Insulin drives the blood glucose to the edge of the cell where it's then collected and it's used for energy, or it is stored, right? It could be stored as, glycogen, or it could be stored as fat. So the reality is, what you see nowadays and how it affects sleep is many people have two issues. One, if they have glycemia issues, so high blood glucose issues. So, they're eating too many refined foods, they're not looking after themselves. And women specifically have reactive hyperglycemia issues. So they go more up and then down, and they can't control it at the bottom end. This is where, for instance, you will get like hangry between meals. Like if you go too long without a meal, you get hangry. So it's important to control both. So how that would play out with sleep is, for instance, the typical way is one person will struggle to fall to sleep. Okay. The other person will wake up generally 3 to 5 hours after sleep. Okay. So if someone is reactive hyperglycemic, they'll generally wake up, they'll go to sleep okay, but they'll wake up. So what's happening is their blood glucose is dropping. And because they're not stable, cortisol, stress hormone, which breaks down stored energy, will break down more glucose to maintain function of the brain. while you're sleeping and other organs, because you still need glucose when you sleep. But cortisol, stress hormone, is directly an inhibitor of your sleep hormone.
Yeah,
So it wakes you up. Yeah, melatonin, exactly.
the two opposites. So just to
Yeah.
synthesize what Cliff has said here, basically, when your blood sugar is not stable, there's two different possibilities. Either you're going to have a hard time falling asleep, you'll be wired, right? Or you'll have no problem falling asleep, but then you'll wake up at a weird time in the middle of the night. I actually have a client that I'm working with right now, one-on-one, and he will wake up on the dime at like between 4 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's so consistent with what Cliff is saying. So like I know with him, like he needs to get his circadian rhythm locked in, because otherwise he can't stabilize his blood sugar. And if he can't stabilize his blood sugar, he will continue to wake up in the middle of the night and not repair and recover properly. His HRV scores are in the shitter because he can't recover, because he can't stay asleep throughout the night. And so that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. And essentially, like, it's a gradual process, because if you're someone who's more reactive hypoglycemia, which a lot of people are nowadays because of stress and all the things that are going on, probably running to like just 3 meals a day, which is kind of like an ideal thing for circadian rhythm, probably won't work for you straight away. So what you might want to do is try and do 3 meals, but then, for instance, just have maybe a protein-based snack like 20 minutes before bed, just a very small one.
What do you think about shakes? Like,
the thing is, I prefer something that takes a little bit of time to break down for people. So like, for instance, it gives them a bit of more longevity. So like, it could be, some good organic turkey ham, or, or chicken, or whatever it might be. It could only be like 50 grams. It doesn't need to be a lot, but generally like a tiny snack. And generally what I find is, why I'm working on the other circadian rhythms, that gets them sleeping through. It doesn't work on day 1 normally, but within day 3 to 5, they're generally sleeping through again. You might need to mess around with the portion size, but that's a good little hack, like just to start with, until we can get the other things working, and then we can kind of take that thing out. Because ideally with circadian rhythms, as not eating within 3 hours of bed is an ideal situation to try and take as much pressure off digestion as possible.
Yeah, for the lymphatic system, because then it has the opportunity to clear out, right? But what you're saying is, if someone is not they're just, their stuff is not in a great place, then as a way to ease them into just staying asleep throughout the night, we're going to have a quick little protein snack 20 minutes before bed to help stabilize the blood sugar.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, the thing is with it, you can tweak it. Some people I just give just protein, for instance, like a lean protein. Other people, I will give them a little bit more. So it might be a little bit of protein, a small bit of hummus, and like carrot, something like this. It depends on like how their biochemistry responds. You sometimes have to play around with it. But generally, as long as the snack's not too big, so it doesn't feel heavy, obviously, and it like, for someone like Marta, for instance, my wife, right? If I eat at 5 or 6 p.m. and I go to bed at 10:30, I will get the best possible sleep, right? If she did that, she will have horrendous sleep. It doesn't work for her. She's had years and years and years and years of inflammation issues and blood glucose management issues, all sorts of stuff. So if she eats her main meal with me, then she has a tiny snack 20 minutes, 30 minutes before bed, she's flying.
Nice.
Her deep sleep is 2.5 hours and plus.
Yeah. So just to make this like really actionable for people, as you, the viewer, if you're, you might be being like, okay, God, I get it.
I know it's a lot.
These things are important, and I understand that this is like a necessity, and I also know that, like, based on what you guys are saying, like, everyone's body is kind of different. Everyone needs different things. Well, maybe you could give us some general overarching principles and steps that are really applicable and are very just laser. Like, if anyone does this, it's going to improve their circadian rhythm.
Yeah. So first thing is, wake up and go to bed within an hour every day, like within an hour of its time every day. So keep it between 10 and 11 p.m. or 9 and 10 p.m. or whatever it might be every day. Doesn't matter if it's Saturday and Sunday. Body doesn't give a monkeys if it's Saturday and Sunday, right? It doesn't know the difference. So keeping that. The next thing is do your best not to eat within the first hour. And within that first hour, get light exposure, get outside for 20 minutes and walk. Like, doesn't have to be running, doesn't have to be exercise, just walk. And then ideally 3 meals a day, and the last meal being no later than 3 hours before bed. And the other factor with that is the one to talk about is alcohol, right? Because alcohol screws sleep, like deep sleep specifically. Everyone knows it, like, because people that are stressed, they use alcohol to calm them down. The problem is alcohol doesn't help you sleep. It's a sedative. So what alcohol does when you drink it is it starts turning off the prefrontal cortex. So it slowly just reduces consciousness throughout the brain until you drift off. But the problem is you never get into deep sleep. So you might sleep through, but you'll never wake up and be like, wow, like I had a really good sleep. So try and have alcohol. If you are going to drink it, have it with your last meal and not afterwards. Definitely not within an hour of bed either.
What do you think about weed and or CBD?
The thing is with it is that it depends on the person. Like there's certain people that I've seen it have really positive effects with. And there's people that I've seen it do the complete opposite. It's a really hard one to answer, that one. Like, you know, I know there's lots of people out there who want everyone to think CBD is the miracle thing in the world.
Yeah.
But the reality is, you know me, you've worked with me long enough. Like CBD is not an underlying cause. It doesn't sort underlying causes. You know, it can do massive things with regards to pain and anxiety and calming people, which then can put them in a state to go and do the work they need to do on other things. Totally agree on that. But for me, you know, you don't have a CBD deficiency. Do you see what I mean?
Yep. Any last words on the circadian rhythm, things that you want to leave people with when it comes to their sleep or getting their circadian rhythm down?
Well, I think, you know, if they bought your sleep course, they're in great hands because you have dedicated yourself to this. And, you know, as someone that I've worked with, I've probably not met that many people more committed. So I think if they're following the stuff that's in your course and they just do that, I'd be surprised if they don't get great results. But the reality is that they have to be willing to understand this is something you do for life, not for a week. And like it changes everything. Do you see what I mean? Like, I always made a point when we first ever spoke, I was like, I don't give a monkeys about a testimonial in a week's time. Like, I want you to come back in 5 years and tell me like how well you're still doing. Like they're the kind of testimonials you want for someone. So really anyone watching it, you know, if they're doing the stuff you're telling them, I'm sure they get great results.
Yeah, man. And for you, the viewer, it's a lifestyle, right? That's why my company is called Lifestyle Multipliers. It's like, I believe that there's a better way to do things. And we've been fed a narrative that isn't necessarily true or needs to be true for us. So my life has become infinitely better since I started getting better sleep and really like working with Cliff and focusing on these parts of my life. So I want to give that to you. And if obviously you can see Cliff, he just knows, he's a wealth of information. We didn't even touch the surface. And I did my very best to keep him out of the weeds so that we could the information can be accessible to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to message Cliff on Facebook. It's Cliff Wilde, Wilde. And I might put like a link to an application if you have like really, you know, more serious health stuff going on and you want to get sorted. Like, you can definitely talk to him. He is my highest endorsement. And thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it. Thanks, Cliff, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to him or reach out to me, and we'll do everything we can. A little disclaimer, as always, is none of this is medical information, just here for educational purposes. But I'm so happy that you took the time to watch this, and hopefully you got some value out of it, and I will see you in the next one.